Terrorists collide and new genocide. I am, for the last time, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is May the 3rd, 2021. And on this date in history, I'm going to go with Wednesday's date because it's more fun. It's Cinco de Mayo, the day that the Mexican army beat the French in the Battle of Puebla. Also, tomorrow's Taco Tuesday, so what a great way to end a year. Thanks, everyone. It's been a great year, and I will miss you. Come back and see me.
Okay, now let's move into Iraq. Uh, as you know, there was a war around the time you were born, but in truth, there was a war that started 10 years earlier, or really 13 years earlier. In 1990, Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. He did that because Kuwait had a lot of money, and he did this to help pay for the war with Iran. During the 1980s, the United States supported Saddam Hussein fighting Iran because we hated Iran. So we gave him weapons and we gave him supplies to do that. But now he's attacked a country that was friends with the United States and provided oil to a lot of countries around the world that Iran and Iraq didn't. So 28 countries would support the war against Iraq. These 28 countries, or this coalition, was put together by George Herbert Walker Bush. In addition to the United States, 15 other nations would send troops to fight Iraq, including 10 Islamic nations. 16 years later, Saddam Hussein would be executed for gassing Kurdish Iraqis. That's them on the bottom left-hand side. There were about 30,000 people that lived in the city that he bombed that were killed. Men, women, children, the elderly were all killed because they had different beliefs in Islam than he did. That'd be like a bunch of Baptists killing Methodists because of differences in their religion. So that's the actual reason why Saddam Hussein was executed. He was executed because of the world courts, and well, he was dead. So for 37 days, the United States bombed Iraq nonstop. This was called Operation Desert Shield. Okay, so after that period of 37 days of bombing Iraq, the United States invaded Iraq. Okay, so Iraq bombed Israel and Saudi Arabia during this time, two places where the U.S. had troops uh, to fight the Iraqis. We were able to shoot down several of their biological weapons being launched on missiles that they bought from the Soviet Union called Scud missiles. Okay, they bought them from the Soviet Union before they became. Well, anyway, they bought it before the fall of the Soviet Union. Uh, so they threatened biological weapons. They actually launched biological weapons, and once the 37 days were over, U.S. forces marched in with a new type of technology called called global position satellites, or GPS. We were able to move faster through Iraq than even the Iraqis were. We got to the gates of Baghdad within 4 days. Saddam Hussein agreed to remove his troops. The U.S. liberated Cuba and ended the war. Saddam Hussein stayed in power, however. Now, this was kind of controversial, but on the other hand, if you take him out of power, then you very well force the United States to stay there and be part of the activity to clean up what's happened. So we decided not to do that, which was probably a very smart move on our part. Well, anyway, moving on. When the Soviet Union fell apart, uh, there were about 16 nations that now were independent nations, and so uh,
Russia is going to join together with 12 other nations to become the Commonwealth of Independent States, or the CIS. Yeltsin dissolves the legislature, however, in 1993 and calls for new elections, which leads to a lot of violence, believe it or not, and leaves over 100 people dead just calling for new elections. So while the Soviet Union didn't exist, unlike Eastern Europe that had peaceful revolutions, or not peaceful revolutions, peaceful evolutions, or peaceful elections that led to bloodless revolutions. In Russia itself, the violence continues and gets much worse. Now, this small Russian land by the name of Chechnya, you're going to have a major war there. Okay, so the first Chechen War. So this is a small Islamic land that was under the control of the Soviet Union, and they fought for independence. They used guerrilla warfare after seeing how successful it was against the Soviets in Afghanistan, and this is going to lead to somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 civilian casualties alone. So this doesn't count the military, but just the civilians that are killed. And one of the things that, when you're not accountable as an army like you are in places like the United States, when your military goes out and starts killing civilians, there's going to be some massive problems. In the United States, all of our soldiers were called baby killers because of this level of violence. But whenever you're in Chechnya and you go into a town and someone, just an odd person from the crowd, approaches you and has a bomb either strapped around them or a bomb that they kind of drop at your feet that kills your men, the response is quite violent and bloody. You line up everyone in the town and you start executing them until someone comes clean on who the dissidents are in town. And the problem is, in some cases, there are no other dissidents, or they don't know who the dissidents are, and you're killing innocent people just because they're there. Anyway, so Vladimir Putin took over power in 1999. Yeltsin actually wanted him to be the successor. He was a former director of the KGB, and so he centralizes all of the state authority. And by the way, well, never mind. I'll get to that here at the end of the slide. So he's pushing for economic development. He wants to try and move Russia on from where it is. Anyone who is against him, he has silenced. Okay, in one way or another, he finds a way to silence them. In 2008, according to the Russian Constitution, he's not able to run again. So then he becomes the prime minister instead. Dmitry Medvedev becomes the president. But Putin changes the rules, and even though he was prime minister, he was kind of a co-president, and Medvedev actually wants to stay alive, so he doesn't do anything to stop Putin from doing this. So Putin becomes president in 2012 again, and is still president today. And as far as getting him out of power, the only thing that will do that will be his death. In fact, he's so powerful, he can ride and take pictures of himself shirtless riding a horse, as he is on the screen right now, and there was nothing anyone could do to, talk him out of it for one, but stop him either. He ends up annexing the Crimean Peninsula away from the Ukraine in 2015. COVID. Sorry about that. Anyway, moving on. September 11th, 2001. Osama bin Laden was the head of an organization called Al-Qaeda. He had 19 terrorists board four planes. They took them over with box cutters. All of them had received training to become pilots, and all of them knew how to fly. One of them was remarked saying he never needed to learn how to land afterwards and stopped going to training. Uh, these box cutters were used to cut the throats of the pilots and any of the crew that was close to the cockpit. Uh, they went on early morning flights on a Monday that uh, there were very few passengers. They rode in first class, so they were in the front of the planes, and most of the planes had less than 20 people on board. That's why they were able to be successful. Uh, the first plane hit about 7:30 in the morning our time, and everyone thought it was an accident. Then about an hour later, the second plane hit the second World Trade Center building. At that point, most of America knew we were under attack. Shortly thereafter, another plane hit the Pentagon, and the passengers on board the fourth plane that were headed towards the White House, uh, they found out by calling families whenever they were on the plane and found out what was being done, and they decided to go in and take over the plane. Uh, they got into the cockpit. The plane was aimed into the ground and crashed into a field in Pennsylvania. The U.S. was targeted because of the involvement with Iraq and also with the support of Israel. Shortly after the attack on 9/11 in Afghanistan, the United States invaded and started a war to fight the Taliban and Al Qaeda in Afghanistan. And within about a month, the Taliban left Kabul. Uh, Osama bin Laden probably went to the mountains. And as of the time of this recording today, U.S. forces continue to be in Afghanistan fighting these terrorist groups. In 2003, uh, Bush enacted a new type of military doctrine called preemptivism. That is attacking someone before they attack you in the hopes of stopping any type of an attack. Uh, Iraq was targeted because they harbored terrorists and also did not let the UN inspectors in to search for nuclear and chemical weapons, which was one of the requirements that was made of them at the end of Desert Storm just 12 years earlier. Uh, they actually had some intelligence saying that Iraq had chemical and nuclear weapons, and they had Saddam Hussein saying that on video. They didn't have those, and the reason he said that was because he didn't want Iran to invade them. The majority of the fighting was over in a short 6 weeks, and the U.S. controlled all of Iraq. Saddam Hussein was captured months later, and both of his sons were dead. Angela Merkel, she was she was at one point the East German chancellor, and she's been in power since 2005, and she'll be stepping down soon. And there's a lot of controversy on who's going to be her successor. But back to her, she was the first female chancellor of East Germany and the first female chancellor of Germany also. Uh, and as leader, one of the things that she was trying to do was to restrict immigration to prevent everyone from pouring in from other countries around the world. So in much the same way that the United States has tried to slow immigration, so has Germany and several other European nations. Moving on to Tony Blair. Okay, Tony Blair was someone who supported the middle class in England. He was the Prime Minister of Britain. I should probably put that part in so you're familiar with that. He was in charge for 10 years, and he was in favor of economic growth. They adopted a lot more policies, kind of like laissez-faire policies like the United States had with business.
He also supported the U.S. fight against terrorism in 2001. Now, one of the bigger controversies uh, throughout the European Union was the fact that Britain was not a full member. They were not a full economic member either. They still maintained their own currency, but enjoyed all the privileges of the borderless Europe. And so, as a result of that, they voted to leave the European Union in 2016. And uh, the question is, how long will it take before all of those economic ties are really cut and the sanctions are put in place to make Britain regret it and maybe come back to strengthen the value of a euro? I don't know. It could take some time. The Arab Spring, okay, there were revolutions that started in the Middle East to bring about democracy. And all of this starts when with the Jasmine Revolution, okay? Mohammed Bouazizi was a 26-year-old, and he set himself on fire to protest the government in Tunisia. So this is a callback to what happens in Vietnam whenever the Buddhist monk does the same thing to bring awareness. Following this, the president of Tunisia is going to flee to Saudi Arabia, and this starts other democratic revolutions in Libya, in Egypt, and Syria. In fact, things got so bad in Libya that they went after the dictator, the leader of their country. Now, it's possible that Muammar Gaddafi, and by the way, if you look him up, you're going to find that there's about 26 different spellings for his name. So anyone who wants to follow this up, well, you might just look at that. Anyway, so Muammar Gaddafi was a multi-billionaire and possibly could have been on the brink of being a trillionaire. And the way he did that is he had the government take over all the oil in Libya, and almost all those profits went directly into his own pockets. In the 1980s, he was accused of having terrorists from his country provide attacks on the United States. So the United States, under Reagan, bombed Gaddafi and killed a few of his sons. And it gets him less active on the global stage. Finally, the Libyan people were tired of dealing with Gaddafi, and they decided to overthrow him. And there's a video of him running for his life afterwards as a mob of people are descending upon him, stabbing at him. And as he's running away, one of them stabs him right in the butt. Okay? Like center mass in the butt. And he's running, and he goes from his legs moving to the point where they lock up, and he kind of falls over like a whale, like jumping onto a beach, just kind of flops over on his side. And then he's violently stabbed and murdered from that point. There was a popular television show called Tosh.0, where the host of the show would run around and Gaddafi people by punching them in the butt crack. How he didn't get in trouble for harassment and sexual harassment, I'll never understand. Anyway, you can look that up on online if you want to, but don't do that, because don't do that. I forbid it. But I don't control your YouTube. Anyway. So the global economy. So the World Bank, okay, was created in 1945. It was controlled by developed nations. And it gave loans and advice to developed nations, and was able to send out money to several different nations, and, by the way, make themselves a ridiculous amount of money. The International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, they oversee the global financial system, and this includes a total of 188 countries that are members of the IMF. And they will work during certain financial crises to try and keep them from becoming too horrible. Although at this point, it's very hard for it's very hard to be able to get something like that done. Now, population growth. Okay, they believe that most experts believe that the world population will rise to as much as 12.8 billion people by 2050. And this goes back to the Malthusian trap. Okay, will we be able to produce enough food, or will this lead to more wars, or to famines, or to diseases that will cut down the population to a more manageable group? So, also, what do you do with future problems with food production? And then, what happens if the rest of the world looks at the fact that the U.S., who has only 6% of the world's population, but consumes 30 to 40% of the world's resources? At some point, that's going to come back to bite us. Luckily, I'm dying. So this will really fall more on you than it does on me. So, sorry to tell you this, but sucks to be you.
The global financial crisis of 2007 began because of a collapse in the U.S. housing market. What happened was, in a short period of time, because of some really bad mortgages that had been made over the last 10 years, people couldn't pay back their mortgages because they didn't make enough to pay back their mortgages. When that happened, their houses were foreclosed on. What happened to other houses around them is it lowered the property value of those homes. So as this would explode and have a domino effect throughout the U.S. market, you might have a home that you paid $350,000 for that was suddenly worth $100,000. And if you're trying to move to a separate place, you were upside down, and you might owe $200,000 more than your house was worth at the time. And if you're trying to move to a new area, that really gave you no choice but to really go into bankruptcy. Because people weren't paying back their loans in large amounts because of the bankruptcies and the devaluation of other products, this caused several banks to go bankrupt as well. So whenever the banks started going bankrupt and the people started going bankrupt, uh, this started really a ripple effect into just about every industry in the United States. A group in Europe tried to bail out struggling Eastern European nations. Several nations around the world invested into U.S. real estate because it was nice and stable at the time. But the truth was, this was an economic crisis that would continue until about 2015 in some cases. Also during this time, the price of gas went up. People paying at the pump went from paying about $1.50 a gallon to paying over $4 a gallon. So that also caused the price of other goods to go up, such as bread and other commodities that people cannot live without.
The Islamic, not the Islamic State, genocide. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. I was on the next slide already. In Rwanda, there are 100 days where a horrible genocide happens between the Hutu and the Tutsi. There was an ethnic battle between the two. Now, I know what you're thinking. It was white on black violence. It was actually black on black violence. And it had to do with the size of your nose on one thing, on one side, and also the color of your skin did come into play, where if you had a certain degree of Anglo blood in you, or perceived Anglo blood, that you'd be massacred as well. And this leads to over 1 million people just being butchered in the street with machetes. The world does nothing as this is going on. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it, but there's a movie called Hotel Rwanda, and Don Cheadle's in it, and it shows one man's struggle to try and protect as many people as he could. So he was in many ways kind of the Arthur Schindler of this event, where he tried to protect and save as many lives as he could. Darfur. This becomes a major horrible problem starting in 2003, where there's the mass slaughter and rape of Darfuri men, women, and children in the western Sudan. Okay, there was a group of Arab militias that were known as the Janjaweed, and they ended up killing 480,000 people, and they leave about 2.8 million people homeless. A horrific event. The Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. This is formed by members of Al Qaeda, extremists in Al Qaeda. And ISIS was such a group of extremists that Al Qaeda was terrified of ISIS and calls out to stop ISIS. Okay? The group broke off and became their own group in 2014 and renames themselves the Islamic State. And they recruited from around the world, including in the United States, and they would go on to places like Instagram to recruit. And their recruiting was so powerful that thousands of Americans that were not Muslims, or not thousands, there were about 100 Americans that tried to join ISIS and tried to go over to fight in Syria and in Iraq. Eventually, the NSA and Homeland Security was able to find a lot of them and stop all of this. But ISIS wasn't done. In addition to striking out and claiming large parts of both Syria and Iraq, they also made a major attack in Paris in 2015, where suicide bombers would attack a soccer stadium. And the gunmen, in addition to that, were attacking cafes and restaurants. And they actually moved to a concert where they killed 130 people and wounded well over 300. Man, what a crappy way to end a class. I mean, I give you nothing but terrorism there at the end, so I'm sorry about it. We have the AP exam coming up, so just do the best that you can. Again, I'm sorry I couldn't end on a more upbeat note. I guess I can say the world kind of came together during the COVID-19 scare of 2020. So that's kind of good news. And then there was a vaccine for COVID in 2021. So maybe these are some things that can give you hope for the future. Otherwise, everyone, good luck to you. I hope to see all of you again. Please don't cocaine, please don't AIDS, and please don't COVID. Wash your hands, stay safe, but don't be a safe. Okay? Don't be a drug mule. And it's been a privilege to teach you. This has been Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA, and I will see you hopefully sometime again. And I'm out.